And with just 8 days until the election now, concerns on the rise after fires were set inside 2 ballot drop boxes in Oregon and in Washington, destroying hundreds of votes. The fire only a mere 10 miles apart from the other in Portland, Oregon and Vancouver, Washington, both happening this morning. Investigators say a device was tossed into the ballot boxes, causing that fire. But a fire suppression system was able to put it out, with only a few ballots saved from that blaze.
Acts like this are targeted and they're intentional, and we're concerned about that intentional act trying to affect the election process. We're dedicated to stopping that kind of behavior, and we're working toward that today.
Police do say they've identified a suspect vehicle in connection to both incidents.
Now in the final week, not just of World Series baseball, but of campaigning in the race for president. And the focus right now on the battleground states.
Indeed. Vice President Harris is spending the day in Michigan, while former President Obama stumps for her in Philadelphia. Mr. Trump, meantime, will hold a rally in Atlanta, while his running mate, J.D. Vance, will be in Wisconsin.
And while the candidates will be in the battleground states, the talk on the campaign trail continues to surround yesterday's Trump rally in Madison Square Garden, and particularly a so-called comedian who spoke before Mr. Trump and made a number of racist comments, including one about Puerto Rico. Today, the Trump campaign and Ms. Harris responded.
It was a comedian who made a joke in poor taste. Obviously, that joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or our campaign.
I will never forget what Donald Trump did and what he did not do when Puerto Rico needed a caring and a competent leader. He abandoned the island, tried to block aid after back-to-back devastating hurricanes, and offered nothing more than paper towels and insults. And now Donald Trump promises to be even more extreme.
And Eyewitness News reporter Joe Torres spoke with Puerto Rican lawmakers and voters. And Joe, is this the kind of comment that could actually cost Mr. Trump some votes?
You know, Sade, it makes you wonder what's the political strategy here, right? It's tough to figure it out. Here we are in the Bronx, home to many of the roughly 1 million Puerto Ricans who live in the 5 boroughs, who live here and vote here as well. Many of them we talked to today, they knew about the comments that were uttered at the rally last night. They also knew that it wasn't the former president who uttered those words, but at the same time they said it'll be the former president who pays the price on Election Day. Approach a Puerto Rican in New York and play the video of last night's incendiary comments about their homeland, and then watch the fire ignite.
What kind of people say that? Yeah. They don't know us. Yeah. Why they judge like that?
It's really hard to accept that came out of his mouth.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
That was comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, who tried to fire up a jam-packed Madison Square Garden crowd of Trump supporters ahead of the former president's speech. The joke bombed, but the explosive fallout reverberated across the country to the 5 million plus stateside Puerto Ricans, many of them registered voters, and more than 3 million American citizens on the island.
Convicted Trump didn't say the words that were said at his rally, but it doesn't matter because it was his rally.
Donald Trump has got to go! Hey, hey! Oh!
This afternoon in East Harlem, a who's who of Puerto Rican federal, state, and city leaders held a news conference to condemn the comments uttered Sunday night, comments made at a rally designed to gain supporters in a tight presidential election, comments that could backfire in a key battleground state.
So, you know, he made a calculated error yesterday. Basically, he said goodbye to PA, to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, we have 450,000 Puerto Ricans.
This is about human rights, civil rights, and this is about my people, my mother, my grandmother who died after Maria. This is about our people who have suffered for way too long.
He has shown us time and time again that he doesn't value us, that he doesn't value our vote, that he doesn't respect us as people.
Now, you had it at the top of the broadcast there, but it's worth repeating that a spokesperson from the Trump campaign today acknowledged those comments uttered at the rally yesterday were in poor taste and do not reflect the campaign or the feelings of the former president. Coming up in our next report at 6 o'clock, you'll hear from more Puerto Ricans who will explain to you why they don't believe that. We're live in the Bronx. I'm Joe Torres, Channel 7 Eyewitness.
Who doesn't know what a tariff is? As always, I'll do it myself. Walking around telling people what a tariff is when he has no idea what a tariff is. Pay attention. Tariff. Are you ready? Do you have paper out? Let's go. Very simply, a tariff is a tax. Thought Republicans didn't like those things. On imported goods that are coming into your country from another country. Goods. With me so far, Donald? Exhausting is what it is, teaching all the TikTok. All right, let's say there's a 3% tariff on iPhones. With me so far? Follow me. This 3% tax is by the U.S. government. They are putting this tax on iPhones. So let's say our iPhones are getting made in, I don't know, China. The 3% tax is not being pushed to China. China is not paying the import tax. Chinese businesses are not paying the tariffs. Are you with me so far? Smart people get it. It's the 3% tariff, the tax, actually goes to the business in the United States that is importing, bringing in the iPhones. So the tax, not on China, but on the U.S. business bringing in the merchandise. Denying this is denying all reality. Now, the 3% tax on the U.S. business, or Canadian if we're talking about Canada, actually gets put on their merchandise. Do you think, A, the business absorbs the cost and they take less of a profit, or B, do you think they pass this cost off to the customer and increase the cost of the iPhone? You didn't say B. I really don't think you have any hope of understanding anything ever. So as tariffs go up, the cost of the product to the consumer goes up. China doesn't pay, the business doesn't pay, and Trump doesn't pay. Now, if the argument is they're going to raise tariffs to force manufacturing to come back to the United States of America so they can increase manufacturing on U.S. soil, fine. However, costs are going to go up because there's a reason manufacturers left the United States in the first place, to get cheap labor, no environmental regulations, no health and safety protection for the worker. The only way to bring this back to the United States and watch costs go down is to break unions, lower wages, ignore environmental regulation, and ignore health and safety. If you think that's for the worker, again, I can't help you.
So Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who also owns the Washington Post, is reportedly keen on having more conservatives write opinion pieces for the newspaper, which is considered quite liberal in its politics. Of course, the Washington Post is now in the midst of a great deal of turmoil after Bezos reportedly denied the editorial board a chance to publish their endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. That has caused an uproar, and as well as several resignations among staffers who say that management didn't have a right to interfere with the editorial department's considerations. Of course, the Washington Post has been making endorsements in the presidential race for more than 3 decades now, but the new management headed by the CEO, Will Lewis, decided that the paper would not endorse this time around and won't endorse in the future either. This raised a lot of eyebrows given the timing of the decision for the presidential election coming up. So that's gotten people wondering whether Bezos did this in order to curry favor with Donald Trump, given that polls show the race pretty even and there's a good chance that Trump could win another term in the White House. Marty Baron, the former executive editor under Bezos, also at the Washington Post, he denounced the move. He said it was quote unquote cowardice. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the two Washington Post reporters who, of course, became famous for breaking the Watergate story. They also issued a statement criticizing management's move. They were unhappy about it as well. Robert Kagan, one of the editors that resigned from the Washington Post, alleged that Bezos' decision was part of a quid pro quo. Bezos, on top of owning the Washington Post and being a founder of Amazon, is also the head of Blue Origin, which is a space exploration company. Blue Origin has federal contracts to build spacecraft, and there's the theory going around that Bezos did not want to endanger his company's relationship with the federal government should Trump win the election.
Let's now shift focus to West Asia. Iran and Saudi Arabia are set to engage in joint military drills in the Red Sea. This is big and comes with far-reaching implications. You see, it would mark a first for these regional powerhouses. For a long time, these West Asia rivals have supported opposing factions in conflict areas throughout the region. They cut off diplomatic ties in 2016 and reconnected last year through an unexpected deal mediated by China. Nevertheless, these joint exercises represent a major change. The question is, what is driving this shift? What's going on? Why is America's ally conducting joint exercises with Iran, the arch enemy of the United States? Could the Gaza war be a factor, or is there more to it? You see, 1 year ago, Saudi Arabia was on the verge of recognizing Israel in a normalization agreement that would have dramatically changed the region's dynamics. It would have further isolated Iran. Now that agreement seems more distant than ever. Instead, Saudi Arabia, a US ally, is basically building closer ties with its ally's arch enemy, Iran. The American ally has stated that any future diplomatic accord for Gaza now depends on Israel acknowledging a Palestinian state. That's a remarkable turnaround for Saudi Arabia. And it's also a big setback for all US efforts in the region. Here's what we know so far. According to an Iranian report, not confirmed by Saudi Arabia, Iran and Saudi Arabia are planning to conduct joint military exercises in the Red Sea. The commander of Iran's Navy, Admiral Shahram Irani, was quoted by Iranian news agency saying, I'm quoting, Saudi Arabia has asked that we organize joint exercises in the Red Sea. Without providing details, including a timeline of when the drills could take place, he said, I'm quoting further, coordination is underway and delegations from both countries will hold the necessary consultations on how to conduct the exercise, quote unquote. And there's another reason why this development is extremely interesting. Remember, since the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza started last year, Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels have waged a war against Israeli and American ships in the Red Sea, as well as the Gulf of Aden. They say that they attack to show their solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza. The Houthis also have launched missiles targeting Israel, drawing retaliatory airstrikes from the Israelis late last month. But that's not all. The Iran-backed Houthis have also been fighting a Saudi-led coalition since 2015 after seizing the capital Sana'a and most of Yemen's population centers. The Houthis had seized the capital of Yemen and forced the internationally recognized government south to Aden. Saudi Arabia, which has backed the Aden government, engaged in a delicate balancing act. Why is that, you're wondering? Well, it's because Saudi Arabia is one of the world's biggest oil exporters. Naturally, it has tried to extricate itself from war right on its doorstep. When the Houthi attacks on ships crossing the Red Sea started last year, Saudi Arabia did not join the US-led naval coalition to deter the Houthi attacks. Efforts by the kingdom to broker a Yemen peace deal, in fact, also faltered in the wake of the Houthi attacks on ships. Which brings us back to what's happening today. Did America's inability to stop Israel from antagonizing everyone in West Asia lead to this? Did the growing unease over America's inability to de-escalate the tensions prompt some of its closest allies to increase engagement with its enemy number one in the region? all signs on the ground do point to this. You see, over the past few months, Arab nations have been leveraging their revived relations with the Islamic Republic, basically to ward off a wider regional war. While the world has focused on the Gaza war and the possibility of the Iran-Israel war, this is what's been happening in the background. This month, foreign ministers of the Persian Gulf states met for the first time as a group with their Iranian counterpart. This is a kind of reconciliation that has the ability to chip away centuries of sectarian antagonism. It is a sharp shift in a region where rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran drenched the region in bloodshed for decades. Iran has continued to reach out. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi even visited Saudi Arabia in an effort to ease the tensions. He also visited Jordan before traveling to Egypt and Turkey. The visit to Egypt was the first by an Iranian foreign minister in 12 years. This is all new. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains adamant and continues to reject the creation of a Palestinian state. Saudi officials have passionately taken to newspapers, through public speeches as well, to put a two-state solution on the talking table. That, Saudi Arabia says, is the only way at this point for Israel to win favor with Saudi Arabia, which, remember, is largely seen as the leader of the Arab world in a way. So what really changed for Saudi Arabia? It's this. These images from Gaza of children buried alive, of mothers grieving over their dead babies, of Palestinians starving because Israel had blocked aid from entering. All this, in a way, made it impossible for Saudi leadership to ignore the issue of the Palestinian statehood. All this has set back any Israeli integration into the region, a long-held goal of the U.S. President Joe Biden. In fact, on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken landed in Israel for his 11th trip to the region in a year. He came after the death of the Hamas leader and the October 7 architect, Yahya Sinwar, to basically push for a ceasefire in Gaza, but the U.S. calls for calm fell on deaf ears in Israel, with Netanyahu vowing to push ahead with its wars in Gaza and Lebanon. Blinken's visit also comes as Israel prepares a response to Iran's October 1 firing of hundreds of missiles. It's safe to say then that the U.S. may be trying hard, but its diplomacy is faltering. Iran, on the other hand, is working overtime to reach out to neighbors. For the past month, Iran has dispatched its top officials and diplomats for an intensive campaign of diplomacy with its neighbors. Neighbors that host U.S. military personnel and bases. Neighbors that had spent decades brawling with Iran. Iran is turning the tables. It is wooing America's allies, and America's allies are now opting to engage with Iran again.